Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. A couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. My name's Allie. I'm joined here by Katie, Janelle, and Aubrey, and I'll do some more intros shortly. But just real quick, for those of you who may be unfamiliar, Face It Together is an addiction wellness nonprofit, and so we provide peer coaching to people with addiction that includes loved ones. We often do that at no cost, and so we are here if you need help. If you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, please visit wefaceit together.org. And then for today's conversation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A button, which you can do anonymously if you'd like. And then lastly, these webinars are a benefit to our Fit at Work program. So that's where we partner with employers to provide our peer coaching as a mental health benefit for employees and their family members. And so coaching is completely confidential. If you're watching this, maybe you've seen our materials in your break room or maybe your onboarding packet. That means your employer believes in this approach and they want you to be well. So again, just please don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of any help. So let's dive in today. We're talking all about how do you talk about addiction with kids, which is, man, so many places we can go with this conversation. I'm really excited. But I think the natural place to start is kind of with our own lived experience. So if you could all maybe just share a little bit about your background and when addiction entered kind of your lives in a significant way. So Aubrey, if you want to start us off, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess my experience with addiction started in high school. I guess for me, I found myself kind of just feeling out of place. I think that's normal in high school, but I found that I gained confidence. I felt more accepted when I was, drinking or smoking weed. And, the friends that I felt like I had found my place with also, participated in that. And so I really found myself going down that journey with my own wellness. And then that lasted about 15 years. And then I was able to find my own wellness after, many tries and lots of natural consequences and just really, yeah, going through that process. But once I found my wellness, I uh, fell in love with a man who struggled with alcohol himself. And we started a family, and it wasn't really bad, I guess, at the beginning, or it wasn't anything that really raised red flags for me. I think just because alcohol is so widely accepted in society that, if it's not something major, it doesn't always, you know, put up a red flag in your mind. But yep, we started a family, and his drinking just increasingly got worse, and there were more and more things happening. And so, just navigating that time with the kiddos and just trying to make sure everybody was healthy and safe and well um, has brought me here where, now, we're doing much better, and we've learned a lot along the way. And now I just try to take that experience into the coaching rooms to help other people who are also still navigating that.
Yes, thank you, Aubrey. Janelle, what about you? How did addiction come into your life?
I think the first time you asked it, one of the words you used was significantly.
Oh, sure,
That
sure. Yes.
no, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about is
Yep.
that um I for myself I don't have addiction, haven't had it, but I have kids who have had it. So, as I've thought back over since I've been coaching really, as I've thought back over the years about, where did this really start? And I don't do that a lot because I don't spend a lot of time in the past on this stuff, but because there's too much guilt and everything that can go along with it. But as I look back, two of my sons have had struggles with substances, and one of them, I mean, he didn't start till he was like late college age. And the other one, I really wasn't aware of it till late in his senior year. of high school.
Hmm.
I think it probably started when he was about a sophomore.
Hmm.
If I look back at some of the behaviors and so on, I don't know that for sure, but I've never asked him that question either. I'm sure he would tell me now, but and that also comes as a result of my kids are telling me more and more what things they did in high school because I think they feel like the statute of limitations has run out on mom's ability to ground them and so on. So they're more open about that stuff. But significantly, I will tell you that I got a phone call one Saturday morning. My kid was about 23 years old, and it was a call from the police station. So that's when it significantly came into my life.
Hmm. Thank you, Janelle. And Katie, all of your stories are just a little different, which I'm really excited for this webinar topic because of that. And Katie, yours is a little different in that addiction came into your life pretty significantly, pretty early, if you're willing to share that.
Yeah, it's funny because like as I was thinking about this question, like I feel like addiction's been maybe the biggest part of my life for a majority of my life, which is crazy to think about, right? That it's just been like so infiltrated in my life and not in a bad way always, like I think it helps me be where I am now, but addiction was always a part of my life. My parents both struggle with a meth addiction. They both tried to fight it from the time that I was young with varying degrees of success throughout that time. Um, I was consciously aware that addiction was a part of my life from about the time that I was in middle school.
Mm.
Prior to that, like I just seen the dysfunction, but I didn't really ever like put those two together. And I remember we had my cousin staying with me when I was maybe like 13 or 14. And she said, "Look what I found in your mom's closet." And she showed me this huge piece of meth. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I was like, "Is that my mom's?" And she's like, "Yeah, you didn't know your mom did drugs." And I was like, I mean, no, it hadn't really occurred to me. And like just to kind of give you a level of like the dysfunction in my house at the time, my cousin had told my mom that she showed that to me. And my mom sat me down and said, "Yes, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I found this in the couch and I thought maybe it was yours. Are you doing drugs?" And so that's the level of dysfunction, that I grew up with. But from that point forward, it became super aware to me, that addiction was a part of their lives, a part of my life. And it wasn't too long after that that I started using meth with my mom. When I was 15, I tried meth with her for the first time that I did meth, and she was the person that I used with mostly, throughout high school, um, until I got older. My journey with addiction lasted until I was almost 30. And it was a lot of on and off with addiction. But when I was 30, I was arrested and sent to federal prison for 3 years. And that was the thing that I always wanted to be sober, but that was the thing that prompted me to like do the work to ensure that I never ended up in a situation like that again. I wanted to have control over my life.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you all. So there's so many scenarios, even that we've just talked about right now, of family addiction, and we won't be able to cover them all today in our 30 minutes to an hour that we have. But I think there are a few maybe that we can try to cover. And first, for Aubrey, Katie, as parents in recovery, I'm wondering how you've each broached the topic of addiction with your kids, if you have, how that at what age does that start? And then how does it kind of grow over time, right? We're thinking age appropriate. Katie, you still have very young kids, and so there are some ranges there. But Katie, if you maybe want to start that one.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't really had very many opportunities to talk to my kids about addiction yet, right? My kids are 2 and 4, but it's something I've thought about a lot. Um, and even just like trying to be really straightforward with them. We don't have alcohol in my house. We don't drink alcohol. But we do have a friend of the family that does a lot of work around our house, and he drinks a lot. And so he'll leave like a beer can or whatever, and the boys will ask me, "What's that?" And just like navigating how to express that in a way that is like not judgmental and not shaming, but also like tries to present like the consequences along with that, because I think in a lot of ways they're going to receive a lot of messages about the benefits of alcohol, like it's glorified in a lot of ways, it's glamorized in a lot of ways in our society. So being able to have a more realistic view of it in our household, I think is really important. But I've thought a lot about my journey with addiction and if I would have known what I knew now then, how that would have influenced my choices. And when I was in treatment, right before I went to prison, there was a lady there and we were talking and she was just a really amazing person. And I was just asking her what her draw was to work in the recovery community. And she said, I never struggled with addiction. I grew up in recovery because my parents were in recovery and they were always really open with me. And so, she talked about the growth that she had and growing up in that environment with them being open, with them sharing their recovery with her, and navigating that life. And that was always really inspiring for me. And so when I think about like where I'm at with my kids now, I want to share recovery with them, right? Like I want them to know that sometimes things are tough and we can make it through tough things, that we struggle and like helping them develop those positive coping skills. All of those things that I learned in recovery, I want to share those with my kids because it's likely that they're genetically going to struggle with some of the same things that I did, mentally, emotionally, those get passed on to your kids. I'm healing. I don't want to waste that. I want to share that healing with them so they know how to cope with those things moving forward. So when I'm struggling, I don't want to do that quietly. I want to share that with my family in a way that's age appropriate. And then going forward, just I want to introduce the topic to them. I want them to know that I struggle with addiction. I want them to know that there's a probability that if they choose to use substances that they could struggle with addiction. I want them to be aware of the resources and supports that are out there. Um, it's really important to me that they can make informed decisions, and I feel like they're entering the world from a really capable place.
Mm. That growing up in recovery is such a cool concept, right? Because, and I am, not a parent unless you count my fuzzy baby Dakota. But I imagine there could be probably, I mean, there's always just fears as a parent in general, but then when you throw addiction into the mix, that gets really scary. So I think framing it as like growing up in recovery and leaning into all those strengths you mentioned, Katie, is really, really cool. I like that a lot. Aubrey, what about your house? What have you found helpful in some of those conversations with kiddos?
Yeah, so I guess I have a range of ages just within my children. My oldest, she just turned 19. I had her when I was fairly young. I guess I wasn't a teenager, but she kind of grew up with me in a way, part of that. And so, I mean, she was really young when I was struggling still. It was just right at the end of my struggles. And I'll say she played, a huge role in my recovery, in general. But, she did experience with, my new partner. She experienced a lot of things just observing
Mm,
like his behaviors. One of the things when I left her father, he was just a very abusive person, and he had his own trauma. And I hope, I really do hope that he can find healing too. So there's no like ill will or anything there, but we had to leave. And that was one of the things that helped me to make that move, which was very hard too. But just wanting her to be able to see, how she should be treated.
mm,
And I didn't want her growing up and thinking that that was love and that that was how, she should expect to be treated by someone who loved her. And so that kind of followed me through, even with the addiction, that she witnessed in our household, and just when there were things that were happening, setting those boundaries. Like when this thing happens, like we're gonna go.
mm,
We're gonna leave, we're gonna go spend the night, at grandma and grandpa's, or we'd get a hotel or at a friend's house or something. And so she always knew, why we were leaving. I felt it was important for her to know. Um, and not going into any extra detail, but just, this, I always said, like, he's not making healthy choices right now, or, he's not feeling well, so we're gonna go. And then as she got older, um, kids are smart. We sometimes think that we're shielding them, but they see things, they pick up on things, they ask questions. And so, I mean, we always, with the younger ones, we always would refer to it as grown-up pop
Mm.
because, they see a pop can and, oh, can I have some? And no, no, that's grown-up pop. Um, and then, as they got older and started to see different things, I remember my son seeing all the grown-up pop cans just out in like the backyard. And he's like, wow, dad really drinks a lot of grown-up pop, And it's like, yeah, um, yeah, there's a lot of them, But then he would see his grandma drink grown-up pop, at like family functions or other people drinking it. And so I made a point to say, like, because after seeing what they would see, they were like, oh, grown-up pop's really bad, and that was when I knew that I had to go into a little bit more detail with it. And so what I told them is that, grown-up pop's not bad. It's just something that you have to be careful with, because you don't want to have too much of it. And just like sugar or just like, anything else, you just, don't want to have too much because too much is just unhealthy. And it can, affect you and it can sometimes make you really sleepy and it can sometimes make you, just say things or act in ways that maybe you wouldn't normally act like. And so you just have to be really careful with it. And so that's kind of where that is with them. It's just, yep, it's something you just have to be careful with and not let your guard down and not to have too much. And with my oldest, going through high school,
Mm.
and that was really, I feel that it was helpful that I have my own experience with addiction. And then also her seeing what she saw,
Mm.
just because sometimes I feel like kids in high school, obviously, they're just like, oh, my parents are such a drag. And, mom and dad, they don't know anything. They're not cool. They don't know. But I think for her, like she knew that I was coming from a place of experience. And so, and I always just told her, like, if you do drink or anything, use anything, just be very careful. Let me know. I tried to educate her on the different types of substances, what they look like, the dangers, what to be aware of. And honestly, I know that, she was honest with me when she did, have a drink for the first time. And I'm pretty sure she was honest with me every time because she just told me, yeah, this happened, or I had some, or I felt sick, or I had whatever. And I think I feel that that was a blessing because I think teenagers, there's peer pressure, there's that wanting to experiment, want to try things, want to figure it out. And so I think just creating that safe place and giving her the knowledge and education allowed her to kind of navigate that in a safe way. Well, and even with partners,
Mm.
dating wise, I know that she has advocated for friends when they were in a situation and they were, under the influence. She's done a lot of things to help them. And then in her relationships too, oh, I broke up with him because he was drinking or I
Mm.
found out he was using meth or, things like that. And so I really feel that it was good to just be open and really transparent and supportive and create that safe place.
Yeah, and then encouraging those. I mean, those are some really mature, strong decisions for a teenager to make. So that's really cool. That's amazing. And we are going to talk a lot about teenagers today too. That's a big a big piece of this puzzle. But before we kind of move on, and thank you, Aubrey, for sharing that and kind of what was going on in your own family. Katie, Janelle, anything else we want to say to maybe um, the spouse of children who are experiencing active addiction in the home. And obviously, of course, here, like we want to make sure everybody's safe. But is there a way to talk about maybe in your work with members that you found helpful as other parents or nuclear family are kind of navigating that and helping, giving the kids information, but maybe not too much information, if that makes sense. If either of you have anything to add there.
I can, oh,
Oh,
Janelle, you're muted.
you're muted, Janelle.
Sorry. Um, so some of this isn't my swim lane. I wish I could have known more about this when my kids were younger. And so that's kind of the place that I'm coming from,
Yep.
is that, I've wanted to educate myself since then about, because I do have grandkids, right? And they're involved. And I guess I'm going to speak for younger ones because younger kids, because that's kind of what I know is I try and be pretty transparent with them. I try to be on the same page as their parents are as far as um, what it is I should be talking to them about and what I shouldn't be talking to them about. But what I found for the younger ones is just trying really to stay age appropriate. Like some of them are, 4 or 5 years old. It's maybe choosing a time to bring something up when I'm coloring with them, those kinds of things that I like to do with them so it doesn't seem out of the ordinary. But the other thing I always think is just really important, no matter how old those kids are, is I'm real big on staying calm
Mhm.
in whatever situation. I really try to. But the other thing is for them, I find that holding eye contact with them, the tone of my voice, maybe the speed of my voice, the volume of my voice, and when I'm talking to them, so that, like Aubrey said, it does give them a feeling of safety. Like, Graham's not all upset about this, and, she's not all emotional about it. So that and really trying to, one thing I wish maybe I would have done is opened up lines of communication a lot sooner, like got a little bit more deep into that. Then I always told my kids, "Oh, you can talk to me about it." But sometimes I think it's like how we say that to them. Well, you can talk to me about anything. I think there's different ways to bring that across to them. So just opening up that communication a lot sooner. And I think that sounds like what Katie's trying to do with her kids is just establishing that it's okay to communicate. It's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to be vulnerable in whatever situation. And um, being able to tell them maybe what they need at that age, because I think if we don't, kids have a tendency to fill in the gaps
Mhm.
themselves with whatever might sound right to them, based on what they're seeing or hearing. So that's my 2 cents worth anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in because I think this is a really important topic, right? Because the way that a kid understands their parents' addiction shapes the way that that person develops, because I think a lot of times for kids, they take blame for things. They feel like it might be their responsibility to fix things for the parents. And so, Janelle, you were talking about that filling in the blank. If you're not putting a narrative there, if you're not assisting with helping them understand what addiction is, they might be putting a lot of that blame on themselves or viewing it in a way that is going to be long-term detrimental to them. And so when I think about like having communication with kids about addiction, depending on the age range, I think when, kids are younger and they don't have as much autonomy, helping them understand it's okay to feel scared and confused, right? And the fact that your your parent has this sickness, right? This disease, it's nothing to do with you, right? They're not showing up for you because they don't love you. They're showing up, not showing up for you because they're struggling with this thing. And so, um, allowing them to have this realistic lens about what's going on. So they're not filling in that narrative that this is me. I'm unlovable. They don't care about me. I'm unworthy of love. So, especially if I was giving advice to the other parent, that's what I'm going to focus with them on. Like, help them understand this isn't about them, right? This affects them. And that's okay that this hurts, right? That
Mhm.
makes sense that this hurts, but it's not about you. You're not the cause. And then, you think about talking with older children, teens, people, as people are starting to develop that autonomy in their life. um, what are boundaries? What do boundaries look like? It's okay for you to set boundaries, right? It's okay for you to create some space in that relationship to make sure that you're okay. And so, you know, again, like Janelle said, it's really age appropriate and determining like what that level of development is for them. But those would be the two main messages that I would focus on.
Mm-hmm. And um, for those who maybe have like that family history of addiction that we've been talking about, I'm going to bring it back to teenagers specifically. We've touched on it a little, kind of that genetic predisposition, how we might broach that topic, how we might talk about it. Um, Janelle, I'm wondering if this is a conversation you had with your kids, and if not, maybe, how would you have that today, or what would you say to other parents of teens?
So there is some addiction that runs in my family. And, the kids were aware of that. I can't remember if it was, something, I don't remember having a specific conversation about it. I guess I will say that. It was just kind of known that that was going on. At the same time, I understand now, even again as they get older, that they were aware of some things because one of them was their uncle, and he's been in recovery now for 30 years. So they have a lot of respect for him and see or know that he was struggling with it, but he has a great life now, and he's just really worked hard at it. The other thing that they were aware of is I have a brother who passed away because an inebriated driver, because of someone else's drinking. And so they kind of grew up with that too. And they understand the hurt that was there as a result of that, and also the anger that was there because we were angry at that other person for
Mhm.
taking him away from us. But so I almost, in a way, sometimes wonder how that really shaped them as far as they saw a lot of that hurt and were maybe afraid to bring things up because, they don't want mom to feel bad, or they don't want some grandma to feel bad. So I wonder about that. So actually, I mean, those are the two things I think that having it in the family, that they were aware of it, and they'll bring it up even now, even in their own addiction, that we know that this runs in the family. And so that's my two older ones. The younger one, he grew up, there was enough age difference between the older one and the youngest one that he grew up differently, in that he thought about it a lot more seriously, maybe because he saw his what was happening with the older brother, and he pretty much took a vow not to do any type of substances because A, he wanted to work in law enforcement and he didn't want it on his record. But um, the other side of that is I am not naive to know that he did not do some drinking in my basement at at some point. But again, so that was the differences for me. The older ones, were aware of it. The youngest one kind of grew up with it more, seeing what was happening with his brothers. And
Mhm.
one thing that I've thought about as he has gotten older is to make sure that you're paying attention to those younger kids,
Mm.
because I kind of think he felt that way for a while, that these guys are getting all of the attention because mom's constantly stressed out with what's going on with them. And I sometimes think that's part of the reason why he took that vow too, of I'm never going to do anything because I don't want to hurt mom. I don't want to hurt my parents. But yeah, that's my perspective
Mhm.
question.
Yeah, and then so and Aubrey, you touched on this a little just with your oldest daughter, kind of having those conversations, making sure she felt safe to come to you. Any other um is there anything specifically you remember talking about that was helpful for her, or how you framed um your past to help her understand her decisions? Anything else we want to share kind of for the teenage parent watching?
Um, I I mean, I definitely touched on the genetic part of it just because her father and I both did struggle with addiction, and so I we did discuss that. And then I think too, just like you said, the safe place where she could feel comfortable, talking about it. But even when she did like tell me about it for the first time, I think just making sure not to just my reactions, I guess, also, not a disapproval and not, I don't know. Also, I think we like to really emphasize like the negative things that happened because of it. Like, well, did you learn your lesson now? Type of a thing.
Something
And
every teen wants to hear.
right. No, exactly. Yeah, trying to stay away from that, but letting her, just talk about her experience and like asking her questions and, trying to help her just navigate it like through her own thoughts. And yeah, I think that's maybe the only other thing.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked before, kind of in a different context, but when someone's asking for honesty and they just want someone to be honest, like addiction usually creates a lot of lying, like, please be honest with me. And then um maybe that person is honest and you have a really big reaction or and you have your own feelings, of course, but sometimes that the very thing we've been asking for, the honesty, is hard to hear. And so it's how we handle those moments, I think, are can go a long way in creating that safety. So to your point about talking to your daughter and hearing that she had, been drinking, I think that's what that brought up for me too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, Katie, so you do not have teens yet. But anything you want to add to this vein?
Hmm. I think a really big thing for me, right, is I'm kind of a brain health nerd, right? And I think just like even being able to explain, even if you don't like end up struggling with addiction, like what are ways that you can take care of your brain so that it stays healthy long term and you can be in like good mental health, right? And so, um, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that people are looking for with substance use, right? Like to feel calm, to feel comfortable in your skin. And what are more like natural ways that you can do that,
Mm.
right? Like so whether it's exercise, whether it's like accepting anxiety for what it is, not a bad thing, right? Anxiety is meant to like motivate us in the right direction. So I want to have really clear messaging about, like what you're trying to accomplish and maybe more healthier ways to do that. So the brain health piece. And you know, also just being able to say, like, you're not like cursed or bound to live out the same fate that I did, but our brains and our family react a certain way to substances, right? Like, some people can do it and they don't like have those intense cravings or, that desire to do it repeatedly, but it's both sides of our family, both. And so, um, and I just I don't know, like I think even talking about like mental health, right? And just being able to explain, because I think a teenager is able to understand that like um a lot of mental health issues have onset because of addiction, right? And because of stress. And so if we're able to care for our brains in a way that doesn't trigger um the onset of like certain mental health disorders, so even if you don't end up struggling with addiction, um, you're messing up your brain chemistry. And so
Mhm.
I think that's really important to be able to share that education with my kids when they get to that age.
Right? Yeah, and that because that is so often the piece of the puzzle is addiction or, the alcohol, the drug becomes the coping skill for everything, right? And so rather than just saying, well, don't do that, like, well, also here's all these other tools to hopefully round that out. So couldn't agree more, Katie. So much we could talk about with teenagers. But and there is a lot of information probably out there, I would say, for like signs of drug use in teens. So hopefully that's easier for parents to find now than maybe when you were going through it, Janelle, unfortunately. But there have been a couple I've heard over the years that kind of stood out to me because they were just interesting. So one was like if a bunch of a foil all of a sudden starts going missing from the kitchen, or maybe there's like strange smells. Maybe it smells like nail polish remover. Any other, Janelle, that you wanted to share from your experience, like that maybe drugs are in the picture for a teen?
I think one of the things that I noticed was, and this is probably pretty, I mean, as far as ones that you were talking about, I'm not familiar with other ones, but um that as again, as I think back on it, his something that he totally, totally loved to do, he stopped doing it. And that was one of the biggest, again, as I think back on it, wow, that was a pretty good sign for me that he pulled out of something that was so important to him. Um, Sorry, these guys probably have better answers for that than I do.
No, I think that's important to note too. But um, yeah, Katie, Aubrey, any from even from your own background that you would add?
Yeah, I think I instantly thought about my background, right? And like one of the things that stood out to me is I lost a lot of weight, right? And I remember at one point in time, my grandpa saying, "Have you lost weight? You look great," But it was like a lot of weight to lose in like a short period of time. So, like weight loss, behavioral changes, like Janelle was talking about, like withdrawing from things that were really important to them, being avoidant of, your family and always being gone. I remember at one point my grandma said, "You only come here to shower and sleep." I didn't really have any interest in like doing family activities and things like that. And granted, some of that stuff is normal teenage behavior, right? Like the separating, the autonomy, developing that. But I think you can kind of like trust your gut to see if it's something that is more. But really, like that big thing is any drastic behavioral changes. And just kind of like leading back to some of those things that we talked about before, like being able to open up those lines of communication. So if you are seeing these things, like some of the things could be normal, right? But some of them could be something else, whether it is addiction or mental health or an eating disorder or whatever other thing, just being able to be aware and having and working hard to develop that kind of relationship that you can ask your teen about what is going on.
Hmm.
Something I thought about when Katie was talking about earlier too is that, um, as I'm coaching and the people with substance use disorder are older, they're usually 20s on up. One of the big things is shame, right? There's a lot of shame for them, and so I can look at both of mine and say there's a lot of shame there. And I wish I'd done some work way back when I especially saw it in my middle son, I guess, more in his high school in his senior year, was working on if this happens, if something comes up, it's not you're I don't think you're a terrible person. I'm never going to think you're a terrible person. And making sure that they understand that they really feel that.
Mhm. Aubrey, did you have any you were thinking about?
Um, I guess just what how it's already been said. I think just, we know our kids and just kind of trusting your gut.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, I think too, coming at it just from like a communication standpoint, even if you're not sure, because you're right, teenagers they go through a lot of things and they're moody and they like to sleep a lot and they like to stay up all night and they like to be out all hours. And, so it sometimes can be a little bit hard to know for sure, but I think just, yeah, trusting your gut. And even if you're not sure, having the conversation and then just, making sure that you're coming from a place of, like, I worry about you, when you're out late and, I just want to make sure that you're safe. Instead of the are you or like that kind of it comes across as accusatory, even though like you are asking, but I think it's just because you're so afraid that it is and you want them to be honest and it would just say just be careful about the tone and just, making that safe place and coming from a place of like genuine, care, which is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll put in a plug here for some of our past webinars because we've talked a lot about communication, we've talked about enabling, we've talked about boundaries. Like there's so much to this picture. But is there anything else we want to say about that conversation, like thinking about that teen? Maybe drugs are in the picture, and how we want to go about that. Janelle, any other thoughts to add there?
Um, I think it's super important to be in agreement with whoever your significant other is, your partner, your spouse, that you guys are coming from the same place and that you agree on how to present it
Mm-hmm.
to them, how you want to have that conversation, when you want to have, where you want to have it, as well as I think Aubrey talked about this a little bit too, what the expectations are and what the consequences are too
Mm-hmm.
of that. Not as a way to beat them up, but I think it's so important to be consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What I wanted to add to, I think also not being afraid to be vulnerable yourself. I think
Mhm.
sometimes we feel like as parents, like we have to be this like bright shining example and, you know, we don't want, I mean, it's never feels good, we don't want our kids to know about like necessarily all the things, but I think it goes really far to be able to say, hey, well, when I was your age, or there was a time when I did this thing, and this is what happened, and this is how I felt. I feel like that really helps them to feel like they can be vulnerable and also to know that, you're not this authority figure that's just, monitoring their every move and expecting them to be perfect all the time. You know how teenagers can say those things. But a real person and speaking from real feelings, real experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, what's worse than a child struggling with addiction? A child struggling with addiction who feels like his family doesn't love him and is isolated and feels alone, right? So if that concern is there, we still love them, right? Let's not shame them. Let's like bring them in. And at the same time, like Janelle was talking about, having really firm boundaries. If you blank, I will blank, right? Like letting them know that these are the boundaries. And I still love you, right? And we're not going to shame you. We're not going to give you the silent treatment. We're not going to push you away. We're not going to like make you stay in your room for the rest of your life. We still want you to be a part of this family. We need you. We love you. Um, I mean, it said a lot, right? That the Johann Hari quote about the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection, right? Like help foster that connection. It's really important, especially for teens when they're developing that identity, right? And often at times a driver of addiction is loneliness, isolation, not feeling like they have a place to land. And so be that landing place for them.
Mm, beautiful. That is a beautiful place to end, unless I want to leave the call open for if there are any other resources, stories we want to leave people with. I think we've got all our questions answered from the audience. But any last thoughts before we sign off? All right. Thank you all so much for being so open, sharing your experiences in your own families. That's so powerful. Thanks to everybody who watched in real time and is hopefully watching this recording. Again, we are here. If you have any questions, if you want to meet with a coach, you can do that at wefaceit together.org. But we will sign off for now. Thank you.